About 43 years ago, I was a hippie house framer, and Debbie was a frustrated state employee. I convinced her to quit and do art, and we had an issue with foundries. There was only one in Louisiana, and that was in New Orleans, and the guy was a curmudgeon, was always giving Debbie a hard time. So I said, I'll build one. Let's buy a building. So we bought this little building. It was owned or built. It was the first black-owned building in the city of Baton Rouge. It was a tailor who built it. We bought it from his grandson, who happened to be the president of Southern University, and he financed it for us, actually. 10 grand. I can't forget that price. So I put the lean-to on the back, and we built a foundry, and we poured some nice art. It was very primitive, all manual. It didn't even have a TIG welder. Everything was done with a torch. But we made some nice pieces of art, and those were some good years. And then we had babies, and we struggled with babies, and we struggled financially and emotionally. So we ended up selling the building. And so let's fast forward 35 years maybe. Debbie's hair turned white, mine turned loose, and I'm looking at retirement in a few years. And I said, let's build another foundry. It'll be fun. It'll be fun. So I shopped around for a long time, and I found this building, and I bought it. And it was pretty run down. Structurally, it was okay. The roof didn't leak, but it was really overgrown, a lot of broken windows. They had the screens, the burglar screens on the inside of the windows, so you couldn't open them. The side door was welded shut, didn't have hinges. So, I took the screens and painted them brown and put them on the outside. That was a huge improvement. Had a little waiting room in the front, and it was rotten because that did leak, so I tore it down. Had some holes in the concrete, the driveway, so I replaced that. And it had lots of trash, lots of drums. Thankfully, most of these were empty. Old overhead door, lots of tires. That rectangular tank on the far side was full of oil. That was a trip. The power lines hung so low in the parking lot you could almost reach up and touch them, so I relocated those. This is a pile of trash from tearing down a little office in the front. I burnt a lot of it. More tires. The trees had encroached like 8 feet up onto the concrete, so pushed a lot of stuff back and made a lot more room. I had to get rid of the old concrete, but I had borrowed a loader from work. Put up a big new gate, which was kind of nice. I got that from our fence contractor. You can see the windows now with the painted screens on the outside. It looks a lot better. I put an overhang on the front. I think it originally had one of these, and it just made it look pretty good. So the building's all clean and freshened up, and I rented it. And then the back is mine. So pushing the trees back, I laid some gravel. I put up a tall fence around the back, left over from work. And I don't know where the property line is. I just pushed it back as far as I could before it started going down into the ditch. So now that the big driveway gate is up, my neighbor's property is now secure because it never was secure before. So now I have a fenced-in back, and I have clean slab. All the junk is gone. I bought a forklift, which was one of my worst purchases ever. This thing broke more than it worked, but anyway, it at least got the building built. And I'm ready to build. So I brought in some C-cans. I brought in 2 8x12s from work. We had bought a whole bunch of these for the tool trailers because the front end loaders could pick them up and move them around. But I brought home 2 that the doors were jacked up on. And I purchased 2 20-footers, and I arranged them so that I have 28 linear feet of on each side. 28 linear feet of storage on each side. I put the big doors for the C-can facing the back, sealed them up, and put walk doors on the 20-footers. So I took a gamble here. I put the C-cans on the property line on both sides. I think most of the buildings in this neighborhood were on the property line on one side and 5 feet on the other side. But my little devious mind is saying, well, this is not a building. These are just storage containers. I can put them on the property line if I want to. So I squared them all up with the property. I leveled them all up. They're all at the same elevation now, sitting on concrete blocks. And I use those same big old galvanized clip angles that I used on the gate build to bolt them down to the ground. So they are now forever. But anyway, I did that, and then I didn't do anything for a month, waiting for any backlash from the neighbors. And there was none. They were all happy I was there because I cleaned the building up. The mechanic who used to rent the building was terrible. He was stealing electricity and water, and I was just a hero that moved into town, so I could pretty much do what I want. So anyway, the storage containers are on the property line, both sides, but they're not a building, and I'm sticking with that. And it hadn't been a problem yet, and I don't think it will be. If you remember the pump station cofferdam video and the sector gate video I posted, those jobs were coming down right about when I was doing this. Those are massive jobs, and there was lots of odds and ends left over. I found 6 1-inch plates that matched, and I brought them to my supplier, who we did, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of business with, and he was more than glad to punch holes in the corners for me. And we bolted them down. We squared them up, bolted them down, shimmed them up so they're all at the same elevation, which meant I could cut all the columns to the same length, which was basically as long as the shortest one was. I bought these columns from a scrap guy. And hired some guys from work on Saturdays. We did this for a bunch of Saturdays in a row. We stood the columns up and welded them to the base plates, and we have the start of a crane system, a frame to hold the crane system. We had to put blocks on the forks because the forklift wouldn't go high enough, and we had to work really fast because the forklift wouldn't hold a load, so you'd have to get it up there and get it where you wanted it before the thing leaked down. So we set all these I-beams. Now, my steel supplier hooked me up to a barge builder in New Orleans who had purchased these things, and for some reason couldn't use them, but he had already cut and welded on them, so he couldn't return them. So anyway, I got them for a good price, I think. But I bought all these long I-beams from a barge builder who bought them by mistake, or his contract was voided. I don't know why he had them, but we got them cut and assembled, and I'm super happy with this. At this time, I already had a 2-ton electric hoist that I was planning on using on this beam. So one of the structural engineers from work crunched some numbers and decided, or let me know that I'm fine, I don't have to worry about it. It's going to hold 2 tons, worst case scenario, with plenty of safety factors. So that's what I wanted to hear. Now, every vertical column had a 2-inch Schedule 40 piece of pipe welded back to the C-can. So the columns were now tied to the C-cans. Everything's getting really rigid really fast. At this point, I'm trying to decide how to cover this with a roof, or whether I even need to bother. A foundry doesn't have to be indoors. It just it's a convenience. And I found an arched building that somebody had taken apart and was trying to sell the whole package, and I turned him down because it wasn't wide enough to go all the way across. And then after looking around for a couple more weeks, I realized that was like a super deal. And I called him back. He still had it, so I bought it. So that's why the C-can on the right has straight rafters on it, because that's as far as the arch kit that I purchased will reach. Then I needed a structural member to go parallel with the C-cans to set the rafters on. I ended up using these H-piles, these 14 by 89 H-piles, which are like 1,000% stronger than I needed, but I had them. So the only disadvantage with these is that later on when I was drilling to install my lights, it was a real pain to drill upside down through a 1/2 inch of steel, but we made it happen. So once the columns were up and braced off, we grouted under the base plates with non-shrink. That just makes everything more better. And then I cut that long table in half. That was from a demo part of work. I bought an air compressor off of Craigslist. It's 3-phase, so it'll be a while before it's running. And then we added diagonal braces on the corners at the top. So between these 2 diagonals and the pipe running back to the C-can, it's like super, super, super sturdy. Way sturdier than it needs to be. And then I had a bunch of 6-foot drops or 5-foot drops from the I-beam, so we butt welded them together and put another beam for another trolley And this also allowed us to put walkboards up there to finish the roof. It would have been real difficult if we would not have added this second beam. So next few weekends we just did a lot of cutting and fitting and a lot of welding. And I was thankful for the guys that would come work with me on the weekends. Being lucky enough to have real seasoned construction workers made this so much easier. They know how to climb ladders, they know how to measure, they know how to use a saw, they know how to weld a little bit. They're not going to fall. They're not going to smash their fingers. Like if you're using your nephew and your neighbors and all that would have been a nightmare on this job because there were a lot of hazards. But I don't think we had a single smashed finger. So then we put the curved trusses up. I think originally they went much further apart than what I have them because the trusses came with the 2x4s that were originally on them. But I just used all of them that I had and spaced them out evenly, so it's like way stronger. The trusses are held up by U-bolts, which are bolted to some vertical little channels. So we stood the little short, I think these are 3-inch channels up vertically and welded them to my big giant humongous beam. We set the trusses next to them and clamped them and marked and drilled a whole bunch of holes. But every truss has 2 U-bolts at each end, and then the very tail end on the left side is welded to the secant. So they should not be a problem as far as blowing away goes. With the roof going on, we started working on closing in the end frames. These are not load bearing, but they would have do have a pretty big wind load because they're big old flat surfaces. So we used some 6-inch channel iron. These were concrete form accessories that had been used literally dozens of times. They had their weight of concrete on them. They had little weldments all over the place. They were at some point they're not usable for a company when you have to pay labor to clean this stuff up. So they were there for the grabbing, and we put them on the end walls. So I framed an 8-foot doorway on each end. I think they're 8 by 10, and I framed an overhang on the front to kind of protect from rain. We keep the doors open. I framed a smaller overhang in the back just to keep water from getting behind the doors. Doesn't show in these photos, but I put a vent in the gable of each end. It does show the square holes in the ends of the C-cans. That's for our air conditioner unit, because eventually these 2 C-cans were framed on the inside and insulated because they both need to be climate controlled. But yeah, we're making progress. I did almost all this sheet metal by myself after work. Man, I had a lot of energy back then. Not anymore. And the sculpture lady was happy, and I was happy, and that's half the battle right there. Made a permanent low house for the air compressor unit. The big doors roll on unistrut casters in unistrut. And now, 9 years later, I have junked it all up, but now it's usable. I have put in electricity, gas, some water so you can wash your hands. There is no climate control. It is a shed. All the sheet metal around the perimeter is about 6 inches off the ground, so we cannot get, a lot of gas accumulating if something goes wrong. And it's been my happy place for a bunch of years. But I think I'm almost ready to get out of the Foundry business. I think this may just become a welding fab shop soon. And every time I'm looking at old videos, I find pictures of Fred. Fred got cancer. Fred was the kind of guy who always spent his whole life helping other people. He never got married. He didn't have kids, and he got cancer. And when he needed help, he couldn't accept it, and he kind of went to a state of depression, and he committed suicide. And it's all very, very, very sad.